So I didn't introduce myself. As Graham said, I've got an extensive and very general background in procurement. Started off in telecoms, but since moving to North America, I'm been heavily involved in all aspects of IT. And this one is really about myself sharing some experiences I had with some very large implementations of some P2P platforms, and one was very good, and one was not so good. And I learned a lot from those two experiences, plus several other smaller endeavors I was involved in. But primarily those two activities really taught me a lot about what was missed and what was not from certain individuals in this sort of space. So we're going to start with just the introductions, then just go into implementing, and my focus on implementing is not so much going out and selecting your new platform, your new tool. Is actually having a look inside the organization and saying what's available, what are you doing, and what should you look for before you go to market and select something. And then we'll touch upon change management. Again, I'm not going to really go into details, but there's one glaring aspect of the change management that I observed was not undertaken in one of the activities that led to a good deal of friction within the organization. So I'll call that out and hopefully articulate on that somewhat. And then we move to the conclusion on the overall activity. I'd say it's going to be a very pragmatic and high level approach. I'm not going to pretend that I'm an expert. I do this day in, day out. It's just that these a few examples I've been involved with have taught me a lot about this particular type of implementation. So going to the introduction. As procurement professionals, we often see the result of expensive implementations that really don't live up to the expectations of the business. Normally when we're called in, the contract's almost signed, or it's halfway through the term and we've been told to go and right size it or do something with it to save some money, to remove some poor utilization, or really even just get out of it because it was such a wrong turn. But P2P systems are different in so much that we are the procurement professionals, we are the stakeholders, and we really need to be calling the shots on what to do in the market, and when to go to market, and what we actually want when we get there. So we shouldn't see these sort of mistakes on P2P systems. Unfortunately, that's not the case. I think in both examples where I have experience, I was brought in post-contract to implement, and all of this, all this content of this slide is a result of that. So it is entirely possible to spend millions and millions of dollars on a system that, after we've done the workarounds, stakeholder capitulations, the supplier pushbacks, and worked out resource constraints, we actually might end up with something that we have today, doing actually functionally very little difference between what we had previously and what we have as a result of spending millions of dollars. So it is a situation where, I have seen, and, obviously I would like to put out the points, we should look for as procurement professionals to avoid that situation. Are there any questions? And if you find my accent a little hard to follow, or you want me to slow down, please say so. It is a West London colloquial accent, and it's slowed down a lot since I come to North America. But for some people, it can be a little tricky to follow. So if you need me to repeat something, please just say, and I will.
Okay, now it looks perfect. Now, thank you.
Thank you. So I think we've got to look at, before we make a decision to go to market, and we have to look at what we're doing today. So is what we want out of our procurement system a function of the shortcomings of the existing P2P system? Or underlying the whole issue, do we have an operational cultural issue within the organization? Are we not doing the things that we should be doing? Are we not following best practices when it comes to, procuring our goods and, the P2P life cycle, the P2O life cycle? Are these things not being followed? We can move to the next slide. So what is it a P2P system will not necessarily address? Well, it's not going to address your adoption principles. If You don't run a no PO, no pay for suppliers, or you don't run a no PO, no approval for internal 100% of the time. Putting in a new system is not going to change that. There are going to be internal operational pushbacks. Categories such as telecoms don't necessarily require purchase orders, and a lot of the stakeholders try to avoid them by doing very simple, order document-based procurement at the operational level. Areas such as that will give you a huge amount of pushback to move into a purchase order-based system. But without 100% adoption on huge swathes of your spend, are you really going to get the value from a new system that you'd hoped? That's one of those questions. If you've got issues with your internal geo and category code definitions, having a good system requires a little bit of discipline in the way we categorize our spend. And, if we want to implement UNSPC logic to the way we do things, we don't need to buy a new procurement system to do that. We can do that with existing systems. It's an operational change, and we really don't want to be doing that while we're trying to implement a new system. Discipline in populating the PO. This is probably one of the fundamental issues around purchase order systems. They are great tools, fantastic tools for spend analytics, for benchmarking, for all manner of things. If the users actually fill in the line items to the correct level with the right quantities, discounts, and all that good information is populated. We could run very good category reports from that. We can run freeway matching activities by matching the invoices explicitly to the purchase order and to the contract, but only if the purchase orders are filled in properly. Again, a new P2P system won't address those. If you have a culture of people just filling in purchase orders with loose descriptions and getting away with that, then a new system's not going to help. AP to PO linkage, that kind of needs to exist. If your AP systems don't record the purchase orders, generally there can be different systems, then the new PO system, P2P system, is going to have some problems because it won't be feeding in. And you really would like that addressed, at least on the host system, prior to going out to the market. You've got other issues that we might want to watch for as well. On the more advanced features of P2P systems, we have structured contracts that these systems require. One mainstream procurement system uses contracts as a module, which is kind of like a price list catalog, but it follows very structured contracts, setups. And if your organization doesn't have these global contract setups, then it may not be a good fit for the organization. Again, a lot of purchase order systems requiring good contract management tools. Some of them even have contract management built in. But if you have a contract management system that's not well maintained, buying that module in a new P2P system is not going to change the fact that those underlying administrative duties are not being undertaken. So again, that's an activity that needs to be taken and rectified before we go to market. Spend analytics equally. Yes, P2P systems can help with spend analytics from the purchase order side, but ultimately spend analytics comes from the AP systems. You need to get good reports on the AP systems for good. That's the invoice spend. That's the true spend of the organization. That needs to be pretty good, irrespective of the purchase order system. So, we should get a decent invoice level spend analytics from the organization already, rather than relying on the purchase order system itself for your spend analytics. PO types, many different types of PO. Most people do, the very simple quantity-based PO. I'm going to buy X amount of goods, it's going to cost me this much. But there are other types of POs, especially for the newer tech like Amazon, where we do limit POs, where we just put a huge amount of value into a PO and we draw it down based on a variety of different products, but we don't necessarily track within the internal systems. There's also catalog-based POs, and now contracts or sale-based POs that that some of these new systems are advocating. We need to define POs and when to use them. And again, to me, that's an internal function. Doesn't necessarily have to be a function of a new P2P system. We at least need to understand the difference between limit and standard POs and when we can and when we can't use them. So those sort of strategies need to be defined before we go to market. Catalogs. P2Ps now do a lot of catalog type modules. and they'll try to work with existing vendors. We have to understand the existing catalog processes within the organization. If your catalog processes aren't working particularly well, they're really not going to work very well on a new system. There's an underlying operational element to catalogs that need to be addressed. And there's the routing of approvals and purchases that need to happen as well. These might not necessarily be addressed by a new P2P system. And it's certainly some function that needs to be looked at internally first to make sure that that's working, or it can work in a new environment. Cross-charging. Some organizations is a very difficult process. It can impact your POs and the way you, well, it definitely would impact the way your purchase orders will be structured. If you don't have a good cross-charging mechanism, then that's going to affect your ability to centralize your buying and add governance. So if there are cross-charging issues in the organization, these need to be addressed under the current situations. And then we have our distributed versus centralized buying channel. One of the biggest, in my opinion, mistakes is that you can effectively have stakeholders purchase everything and still adhere to some form of governance. I find that is a very difficult scenario to portray. A lot of perhaps maybe some software companies are advocating, local stakeholders being able to purchase off global contracts effectively. But to date, in my experience, I find that the best advocate for buying strategy is a centralized buying strategy where there may be some intake taken on, and people who are familiar with the contracts and the ordering processes really do follow and execute that. And that could be an outsourced function, or it could be an internal function. But when it comes to governance, asset management, all that good stuff, centralizing buying for me is the right approach. Now, that be a subject to contention in many companies and with many peoples, but that's again, personal experience leans towards a centralized buying channel. Any questions on this slide? Anybody like me to repeat anything, or am I moving too quickly? No, I guess I'll take that as okay. So, this point here is if you do feel that, you're looking at a purchase order system and someone or all of those points on the previous slide are valid, then, maybe you're looking at a transformation activity rather than a P2P sourcing activity. When you bring in transformational experts, they may suggest new software, but it's more of a tool. Most of the emphasis will be on operational structural change. And I think when you look at the issues in the previous list, they all point towards a transformational journey rather than a sourcing one. So these issues will probably need to be solved first before you go to market. Next slide. So let's assume that operationally you've quantified your problems. You feel that they are, they're in a mature enough, you're a mature enough organization to warrant looking at a new tool. So you've got to look at what you have currently. A lot of the time, existing tools aren't implemented as well as they should be, and a lot of the functionality you're getting from this new tool is actually incumbent or existing in what you have today. And it's a lot easier to spin up some existing modules in a current tool than it is to go and procure new ones doing the same thing. Now, you may treat this as an interim solution. Your journey may still lead to a new tool in a new environment, but it may be more of a evolutionary process to really leverage what you have currently, and get everything working as it should before you move to a new tool. So look at all the license modules that you have on your current solution. Are they used? Are they leveraged? Are they well developed? And when you've come to the conclusion that you've taken your current tool to the most that it can be, or you've quantified where you could take the tool to the most it could be, then you should probably compare, your overall P2P ambition to see exactly how much of that is being met by the current tool. You may find that 80% of what you want is already intrinsic to the solution you currently have, just needs a bit of development, and that may be the way to go for the short term. Next slide, please. So let's assume that you've looked at your current tool and you think, I've taken this as far as it can go. there is advantages to move to a new solution. There's new functionality they want, and we're going to take it there with this new system. It's just not possible with the old system. It could be an expense-led thing. It may be that the infrastructure required, or it's a difficult tool to work with, and you've got too many people supporting it. And the new tool will give you some benefits in terms of reduced FTE or reduced effort, or reduced infrastructure costs. But let's look at what the new system absolutely must do. If you have a mature P2P process currently, it's just not on the best system or the best system choice or the best system approach. We've got to make sure that the new system off the shelf can match what you currently do. Chances are what you're doing is pretty standard. It's the basic stuff. You're just doing it well, and you just want more efficiency. So your new tool really wants to, with little effort, you need to be able to do a quick cutover. And really, you don't want to be going around the stakeholders and asking them to change the way they do things. Unless, of course, the way they do things is so very wrong. And that's a different story. But, ideally, if you fixed all your operational issues intrinsically with the organization, you would look for a quick cutover. So really, your phase one of a change, you're not really looking to, do anything really ambitious other than, keep the business working as a business as usual. Phase. So that's one of your selection criteria, I think. Can it do what you do today with little effort? I think the second type is there's a lot of emphasis to move to SaaS for our solutions, and there's some merit to that. But we have to consider that these P2P systems hold some very sensitive data, and we need to understand what these SaaS suppliers be willing to sign up to the data protection terms of the organization. And some of the big organizations are really strict. They want unlimited liability and so on. Whereas if you move it to your internal cloud environment, a private cloud environment spinning up as a service to your own employees on the on-prem option, then perhaps you can address those security issues yourself by managing your own environment and your own data. Another thing that's coming up you need to consider when looking at third-party systems, especially those that are from the newer suppliers, is that some of the incumbent suppliers that may run your ERP system that also have procurement tools are now leveraging the concept of indirect licensing. It's in its early stages for some, and then some other suppliers are very, very clear about, if you need licensing for third-party tools to work with their databases and so on. So put that into your consideration. Make sure that that cost is captured before you go to market, or the risk of the cost is captured before you build your business case. I think that is very important. We can move on, please. Some of the newer features of P2P system is electronic invoicing. The electronic, P2P functionality does largely depend on certain vendors signing up to an agreement with the publisher of the solution, or the provider of the service. It's problematic. Some of these large vendors, these are high transactional vendors. These are the guys that you really, really want on the system. These are the ones where you want to see purchase order efficiencies, and they may sign up maybe at a single level globally, forcing you to contract with a single entity, which may not fit your own contracting approach to that vendor. Some of them may not want to interface with that supplier at all, as they are a competitor. So we probably need to ensure that whatever network or relationship that these suppliers are advocating, that your suppliers actually are working with these solutions already, and there's no additional cost to you to bring them onto the tool. So that's an issue. I think it's quite an important issue. I've run into that a few times, that vendors may not do interface with the supplier quite in the way that you hoped. Catalog and contract modules. So if you're on the back of a P2P system, really going to ramp up your catalog and the contract modules, which is like a price list catalog that helps you pre-populate purchase orders, there is a resourcing cost to run these, and they're not part of the service of the tool. We need people to maintain these price books, if you like, or product books, to keep them accurate and to keep the contract tie that you may have updated as well. A lot of lot of P2P are offering the option to tie purchase orders to contracts, and that needs maintenance. So any business case that you run, you need to, consider the FTE support for a lot of the activities that happen with these types of modules. And then following on from that, some of these modules are structured in a way that really don't fit a global organization. They take very, very simple contract structures. And actually, when you try to implement them, you actually end up working around modifying text fields and really just, doing something with a system that is not designed to do, which is obviously going to lead to problems with support and, reliability further down the line. So, good proof of concept is going to be required. You want to get a very complex vendor and get all the data on the transactions, and you want to have your P2P supplier model that in the way that you trade with them to make sure that all the modules they're trying to sell you are actually going to work against the real life use case. That's very important. I think a proof of concept, even if it's with dummy data, but as long as the structure works, you want to see it working. You want to see it working and happening the way that the salesman's selling to you before you sign on that dotted line. That is definite. Next slide, please. So reports as well. One of the big pluses on new P2P systems that they got great enhanced reporting capabilities. You want to see that in action. A nice proof of concept, a nice demo on a construct that you're familiar with one of your more complex vendors would be very useful. And then you have the interface as well. The interface is very important to a P2P system. Only buying channels really interface with the P2P systems. Everybody else uses, sometimes it's called guided buying. They may have some other interface where, they're gently educated on how to purchase things. Every procurement organization has one. That needs to be pretty decent, and it needs to be in place as well before, or at least the scope of it in place before you will go off and do your P2P system. Because as I say, P2P systems are a tool. They're not, there are other things that need to happen alongside P2P, such as, you have information security functions for the stakeholders, for internal purchases. There are catalogs, punch outs, all manner of things that need to be triaged and taken care of on the front end before the actual P2P system is actually opened up and used. So, some thought on that as well when we're deploying our P2P systems would be useful. Next slide. Yeah, so the cutover for me on a change should not be difficult. I don't believe that we should be doing too much training on a new system to do the same thing. It should be intuitive. It should, if we've got what our due diligence right and we've rectified all the problems within the organization that we're not doing it, then really, the fundamentals of the purchase order system will be pretty much what we're doing currently. If we're looking at the change, at least the first phase of the change, we find out that there's an incredible amount of training and asking stakeholders to do their jobs differently, it's going to fail. And that's just a fact. You can't do this after we've purchased the system. The changes, the operational changes, the cultural changes need to have occurred beforehand, at least in part, and accepted by stakeholders before we push a new system on them and with all the undue training and hardship that will come with it. So a lot of pushback I saw with the level of training that was given on a new system, so they could just simply do what they did before, but they had to do it in a different way, which really didn't resonate with them. And for me, a lot of that could have been handled on the existing system. It wasn't, what we were asking them to do wasn't fundamentally different from best practice. So, that replication phase, if done well, should be, largely seamless. Yes, it's going to have a different front end, and yes, there may be some minor user training on it and, shortcuts and stuff on the screen, maybe hopefully quicker ways to do things than they did before. It would really work well on a simple cutover, even if it's country by country. So you want to get that new system up and running quickly as possible and get rid of the old system. You don't want no duplicate billing. You don't want to run the new system in tandem with the old system for months, possibly years, while the business culturally aligns itself to what you want them to do. That would be very, very expensive, and for many people, career limiting, I would say, as well. Let's move to the new slide. Yes. So let's assume that you get the cut over right, and we've got business as usual. We've got, the front end all dressed up. I think it's a time when these are when you're going to start buying these enhanced use, modules. Don't be trapped into prepaying for advanced modules before you've had the chance to implement the basics. I think you push back and just really buy these modules as and when they're needed, and do this proof of testing that you did with the base system as well. And you got feedback as well from clients that you want to get before the fact, or at least at the beginning of an implementation rather than at the end, to really make that a success. So I'm not a fan of buying all these modules up front, irrespective of the per unit cost. I'd say get your basics in place with the new system, get the business as usual up and running the best possible way, drive those inefficiencies in what you're doing today before we start to look at these new modules. And then equally, we should concentrate on the elements that are going to generate the most value to the organization. So, if the electronic invoicing is going to save a huge amount of FTE time and expense with the AP organization, continue trying to match and do things, and that's where we concentrate. That's where you put your efforts on the advanced features, bringing those suppliers in. If you feel that a better, more improved catalog, mechanism is needed. Maybe you want to implement an internal catalog to gather requirements for your Microsoft true up, and you want to leverage your the internal catalog tools of the system to do that. Then again, that could be where your focus is. Maybe you want to use the asset management function integration with some of these tools against user input and user intake as well. There's many different things you can leverage these systems to do, but really just concentrate on one or two of them that is going to deliver your biggest bang for the buck initially. One of the solutions I was working on, they were doing everything all at once, and just wasn't sustainable, and we never got nowhere on anything, unfortunately. One thing you have to remember about the new system: if the new system you put in place has more keystrokes to the user to do the same thing, it's going to fail. No amount of saying this is the greater good is going to, dissuade people from being, difficult or resistive to a system that really takes them longer to do the same thing they did yesterday. And it's far easier to win those battles on an existing system than it is to purchase, spend millions of dollars on professional services and software only to have the stakeholders defeat you. Because they're unwilling to try and move to the new way of thinking. So that's an important thing to remember when we're buying these systems. Next slide, please. So, I've come to the end of this sort of brief, overview of my experiences. Hopefully, a lot of this resonates with some of you. I'm sure some of you won't agree with everything that I've said. But, if you do have any questions, please reach out, now, and I can answer those I can.
Yes, hello, this is Oliver. How can you convince your stakeholders to move to a source-to-pay solution?
Well, again, goes back to the keystrokes. I mean, you identify, when you're going out and you're doing your cultural transformation, evaluation, and you're looking at things that they're doing. People like inefficient processes. In fact, it drives people out of the organization if they do something that's so burdensome that it really makes their day bad. And these are the things you need to address. Now, you can either address that internally, as I say, as an operational change to the existing systems, but if that's not possible, then that is definitely a big selling point in a P2P system. But again, you have to exhaust your internal avenues first, and really, it's more about P2P transformation rather than the system itself. So look at the internal processes. If there's a manual way to fix those, then implement those first, I think. And then if there's further advantages in the P2P system with them, sell the P2P system on those operational efficiencies. I think stakeholders the cost of these global systems doesn't really have much of an impact on these stakeholders, but their currency is time. If we can convince them that this transformation, let's call it transformation, is going to result in a net decrease in the amount of time it takes them to do certain mundane tasks, I think you're going to get a lot of support.
Okay, thank you.